Our project title is The Effects of Positive Reinforcement on Decreasing Self-Injurious Behaviors Maintained by Escape. This project is done by Mary Kate Shaughnessy, Emily Jenkins, and Alexa Havlicek. The key words in our study are positive reinforcement, multiple baseline design, technology, and self-injurious behaviors. Introduction to our study was when we looked at Smith, Press, Cohen, and Kennelly's article in which they stated that severe self-injurious behavior is found in 20,000 to 25,000 individuals, and that all forms of destructive behavior have serious social, personal, educational, and economic impact and limit an individual's ability to participate in normal life routines. Self-injurious behaviors are common in students with intellectual disabilities as a means of providing sensory stimulation to seek attention or to escape an activity or a task. The purpose of this study is to analyze the effect of positive reinforcement in decreasing the amount of self-injurious behaviors in students with intellectual disabilities. And our research question is, does positive reinforcement in the form of verbal praise and a tangible, and our example is using an iPad, decrease the instances of self-injurious behaviors in students with intellectual disabilities? The measure that we used to count the number of self-injurious behaviors our students exhibited was frequency measures, and as stated in CAS in 2011, frequency counts require simply tallying the number of times the behavior occurs in a given period of time. So what we did was we tallied each instance of self-injurious behavior within 1 hour at 3 separate times throughout the day. After observing, we found that escape was the clear function of the behavior. So escape is defined as removing oneself from the environment or task in order to avoid completing an activity or direction. So in escape-maintained behaviors, it's important to design an intervention that replaces the function with an alternative appropriate behavior. We found that the alternative appropriate behavior within our study after observing our clients was the use of an iPad. We used a preference assessment in order to find out which items the student chose most often, and this was again the iPad. So through use of the iPad, the student would remain on task for 10 minutes and then be allowed 5 minutes of iPad use to watch videos of his or her interest. The participants within our study were 3 14-year-old nonverbal females with intellectual disabilities, and these students were in a self-contained special education classroom. The materials used were pen and paper, an iPad, and a digital timer. The ABA therapist also had an office that was located within the same school that the study took place in for the intervention. In our study, we decided that the independent variable was the iPad, and the dependent variable were the self-injurious behaviors. So these included head banging, scratching, and punching. The head banging we defined as hitting one's head using extreme force back and forth on a wall or a solid surface, such as a desk. Scratching is measured through moving one's fingers back and forth on their arms or their legs forcefully and repeatedly, causing skin to break or bleeding to occur. And punching was defined as moving one's hand in a fist-like grip back and forth forcefully to one's face. In order to make sure that our intervention was reliable and valid, we made sure to give a preference assessment and a social validity questionnaire. So 2 social validity questionnaires were used. One was for the teacher and one was for the parent. and we used a 6-item preference assessment to determine the most reinforcing item for our participants. And as we stated earlier, the most reinforcing item was an iPad for all 3 participants when they were given 6 options to choose from. We decided to use a multiple baseline design in order to test the effectiveness of our intervention. So we first took baseline data on the individual's changed phases once the baseline indicated a steady trend, and this took 6 days for the first participant. So the baseline is when the students will be observed at 3 different times and settings throughout the day, at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and 12 p.m. The observations took place throughout the entire period, 1 hour in length. The observations are naturalistic, meaning that the students did not know that they were occurring at that time. For the intervention, once we saw a steady trend, which was measured by 3 or more trials of baseline that portrayed 5 or more occurrences of self-injurious behaviors per day, our intervention was implemented. We put 1 student out of the classroom into the behavior therapist office, and they were instructed to read a story at their independent reading level and answer comprehension questions regarding the story. Threats to internal or construct validity within our study were maturation and history. A threat to the construct validity of the experiment could be in the explanation of the results. So, as a result of our intervention, our results indicated that the intervention was effective in altering the amount of self-injurious behaviors. Participant 1 decreased the total amount per day by 7 instances, which is great. Participant 2 decreased the total amount of instances by 3.82, so almost about 4. And participant 3 decreased the total amount by 5.04. So all 3 significantly decreased the amount of self-injurious behaviors per school day. For future research, we could use a different data collection method, possibly use latency in order to see how long it takes the students to partake in the behaviors. We could conduct a maintenance and generalization session, which is essential to making sure that the research is valid. We could incorporate a generality across responses or measures, meaning that we could use the iPad for different behaviors and use a similar intervention strategy in order to see if the iPad really is what is causing the behaviors to change. And we could train all staff that interacts with the students, and we can make sure that they practice so that all of them are making sure that they are reliably taking data. So, in conclusion, positive reinforcement does decrease the instances of self-injurious behaviors that are maintained by escape in 3 14-year-old females with intellectual disabilities. Thank you for listening to our presentation.